The future of the country was very much on the line. That's how we saw it, that's how I saw it.
Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Because nothing will save the Governor-General.
Calling out, abusing Fraser, the sense of anger is palpable.
8.5 minutes to 3. Australia has a new Prime Minister, Mr Malcolm Fraser, the federal leader of the Liberal Party. He was sworn in Canberra a short while ago, soon after the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr, sacked Mr Whitlam.
He sacked the Prime Minister. I mean, we'd never imagined this would happen. Well, may we say, God save the Queen. Oh, God. Oh, jeez. I remember writing the story, and I remember I took 5 minutes out, about 7 p.m, before I started to write, thinking to myself, stay calm, be professional, don't write some emotional piece of trash. Write something for the ages. The differences between myself and the paper were too great. I understood that.
Looking back at your 28-year-old self, what would you say to him now about his feelings about all of that?
You've got me with that.
The Australian's editor-at-large, Paul Kelly, is the doyen of political journalists. He's fearless, unpredictable. Generations of politicians sweat on what Paul will write about them. In 1975, when he was just 28, Paul covered the sacking of the Whitlam government with characteristic courage, and it cost him his job. But Paul came back, and today he leads by example as a reporter of unrivalled authority. This is the untold story.
It was a brilliant morning. I got to Parliament House about 8:30. This was the entrance to the building, and this is how one arrived at work. Each morning, you walk into this magnificent King's Hall. A lovely November day in Canberra, summer starting to come, but we felt this might be the resolution day because we knew that if there was to be a general election before Christmas, it probably had to be called on the 11th of November. So there was a sense of tension everywhere.
The Prime Minister was the brilliant, flawed Gough Whitlam.
Time to teach them, it's time it was free, yes it's time.
Whitlam campaigned on a mandate to transform the country. No Prime Minister in Australian history has ever put such an ambitious mandate to the people. He wanted a nation that was more caring, that was greatly committed to social justice, better education, better health, a more independent foreign policy, and he believed the country had become moribund in the final years of the previous coalition government under Billy McMahon.
The introduction of universal healthcare, the withdrawal of Australian troops from Vietnam, the introduction of no-fault divorce, just some of the huge changes that the Whitlam government brought about. But beneath the surface of this government, things were not going well in an administrative sense, were they? They were struggling to actually run the government.
There's never been a government like the Whitlam government. We lived it 24/7. Every day, every week, every month for 3 years. And the experience covering the Whitlam government in 1 year was the equivalent of 3 or 4 years covering a normal government. So that was a really exciting time. But the interesting thing about the Whitlam government was that it did a lot of really great things and it did a lot of really bad things. And so you had this extraordinary combination of the great and the ill-considered being fused together. That made it very exciting for a political correspondent.
In the hundreds of divisions which have taken place in the House of Representatives last year and this year, the Labor government has never been defeated.
There was an increasing sense of apprehension and reservation across much of the country, and the Liberal and National parties tapped into that sense of apprehension, the sense of reservation, which became, in the end, a sense of anger. We saw higher inflation and higher unemployment, and the government really struggled to come to grips with that economic challenge. The second extraordinary feature was the Khemlani loan. The Minerals and Energy Minister, Rex Connor, with Whitlam's full support, wanted to raise an external loan to finance the resources sector. Instead of doing this through the normal channels in New York, they picked a Pakistani money lender, Tyrath Khemlani. I mean, what else would you do, obviously? And they got Executive Council approval to give the loan commission to Tyrath Khemlani. To say this was a mistake doesn't even begin to describe what happened. It was an atrocity, and it really alarmed the Governor-General, Sir John Kerr. This was the start of the alienation between Kerr and Whitlam.
Let's talk about their personalities. Gough was extroverted, charismatic, magisterial, imperial. What was Fraser like?
These two men were figures of destiny. They were incredibly physically impressive men, of course, both about 6'5". Whitlam was magnificent. He was dynamic. He was a wonderful orator. He had a sense of the magnificence about him. Fraser was different. Fraser was stoic, determined, unflappable. He was an agent of intimidation, cunning, calculating, never to be beaten in combat. And the incredible thing was, both were convinced they were going to be victorious.
How high were the stakes for both of these men?
The stakes could not have been higher. This was a contest between two leaders who knew that the winner would be victorious, the winner would make history, and the loser, in a sense, would never recover. So Fraser had blocked the budget in order to force the Whitlam government to an election to destroy Whitlam, to have the Australian people vote out Whitlam and end his prime ministership. Whitlam's tactic was to build up political pressure on Fraser to get the Senate to crack, to back down. Whitlam knew if that happened, then Fraser would be discredited. This would be a shocking and devastating blow against Fraser's leadership, a blow from which he would probably never recover. In 1975, I was looking at Farah. We're now entering the Holy of Holies. This is the press gallery overlooking the House of Representatives chamber. Now, this was my seat. This was the Australian seat in the press gallery, a great position. You look down on the entire chamber. You can see the Prime Minister. You can see the opposition leader. You can look around. You're close to the action.
Paul had been a promising young public servant in Canberra, but he wanted a more exciting life. And he found one with a close-up on the most remarkable moment in Australian political history.
You get a magnificent view of the chamber. You can actually see the expression on the faces of the politicians. You can send them a signal, they can send you a signal. But the other thing is, you're close to the action. You are really close to these benches. You're part of it. You're part of the living experience. Here's the story. It's the morning of the 11th of November. Kerr is at Government House. He's got the documents prepared. And the dismissal letter. He is going to liquidate Whitlam's prime ministership at lunchtime that day, because he believes if he gives the slightest signal to Whitlam that he has reservations about what Gough is doing, Whitlam will contact the palace to have Kerr sacked. This is the most extraordinary showdown in Australian political history. Whitlam and Fraser had a meeting at 9 a.m. There was a feeling in the government lobbies, there was a feeling within the Labor Party and the Labor caucus they were on the verge of a great victory. Gough was about to go to Government House to seek a half-Senate election for the Governor-General. Gough was intimidating the Governor-General in public, and he was not confiding with the Governor-General in private. He didn't understand human nature. He did not understand Sir John Kerr. It was a catastrophic mistake. This was where a lot of the fire and brimstone of these days was played out. Whitlam talking to the ministers and talking to the MPs in that room. Upstairs is the press gallery. I was the Australian's political correspondent. My desk was here. My chair was behind my desk. We're close to the chamber. We can get to the chamber in about 10 or 12 seconds. The point about this building is it's intimate. It's intimate. And intimacy is enormously important. This is the beating heart of the press gallery because it's where the boxes are. So this is where the press releases, the statements, the speeches are always released. There was a bell here, so when people released their press releases, they could ring the bell, people would come and they would collect the press release. And often there are journalists milling around here, talking to one another, exchanging ideas, exchanging rumours, attempting to sort out whatever the hell is going on that day. The mood on the Liberal side under Malcolm Fraser was very different. They were quiet. They were calm. There wasn't much noise. There wasn't much cheering. When the coalition parties met that morning, Fraser said to them, "We're not going to discuss the crisis." And when that meeting broke, and the journalists found that there'd been no discussion of the crisis during the opposition party meeting, journalists drew the wrong conclusion and felt Fraser was on the defensive. Fraser was in trouble. Well, the media often gets it wrong, and the media got that one wrong big time. There is a form of conspiracy about the 11th of November. Let's get clear what it is and what it isn't. The CIA was not involved. The Queen and Buckingham Palace were not involved. The dismissal was Kerr's own work. It was his project, it was his planning, it was his conspiracy. But at 9:55 a.m. that morning, the Governor-General rang Malcolm Fraser as opposition leader and put a series of questions to him. And those questions were, "Can you tell me, Mr. Fraser, if you were to be commissioned as Prime Minister, would you advise a general election? Would you advise a double dissolution? Would you obtain supply as soon as possible?" Malcolm Fraser, surprise, surprise, answered yes to each question. Kerr tipped off Fraser the morning of the dismissal. I've called it the tip-off. That's what it was. Kerr was the one who orchestrated the whole thing. Kerr believed in the reserve powers. It was fundamental to his views as a lawyer. It was fundamental to his whole intellectual approach. Whitlam didn't know this. And so when Whitlam asked Kerr to become Governor-General, he had no idea that he was inviting the man who he wanted to become Governor-General, that this man had a passionate view of the reserve powers. Not only that, Sir John Kerr was probably the worst appointment of anyone in Australia that Whitlam could have made Governor-General. And Whitlam didn't realise. He did no due diligence on his appointment of Kerr as Governor-General. Extraordinary. I think Sir John Kerr was an unworthy Governor-General, and I think he compromised and left a stain on the office. Kerr was obsessed with this idea that Whitlam was prepared to sack him, and that's why he concealed his hand from the Prime Minister. So Kerr dismissed Whitlam in a constitutional ambush.
Kerr goes back to Yarralumla, and the first leader who gets there to see him is Fraser. What happens?
Fraser's car was put out of sight. Fraser had to wait in another room for Whitlam to arrive. So the showdown comes in the study. Whitlam comes into the study with Kerr, and Whitlam says to the Governor-General, "Your Excellency, I have formal advice here for a half-Senate election." And Kerr says, "Just a minute, Gough. Before you do that, I have to inform you that I am removing you as Prime Minister," and he hands Whitlam the dismissal letter.
It's a spine-chilling moment. Do you think Whitlam, reading this letter, hearing those words, grasps what's happening to him?
He was shocked. He was repelled. He looked around the room, and of course, he thought about the palace. But at the end of the day, nothing could be done. It was a fait accompli. Whitlam left Government House, and then Fraser was called in, and Kerr commissioned Malcolm Fraser as a caretaker Prime Minister, subject to a series of conditions. And those conditions were that Fraser had to secure supply from the Senate, and then he had to come back to the Governor-General that afternoon and advise a double dissolution and a general election. And that was critical. That was critical. 1:50 p.m. on the afternoon of the 11th of November 1975, I was standing just over there on the edge of King's Hall when the famous Queensland left-wing Labor Senator Georgie Georges came up to me and said, "Paul, I've just heard the Governor-General has sacked the Prime Minister." I took off immediately, ran out of King's Hall, ran down the opposition lobby, up the stairs to the press gallery. What happens after Kerr sacks Whitlam and commissions Fraser is, in a sense, more extraordinary. Gough goes to the lodge to eat a steak. I mean, can you believe it? And plan his tactics, okay? And he does think through the dilemma he's in. He's just been deposed, but he knows that he's got the numbers on the floor of the House of Representatives. So he calls his close advisors together and they devise a plan. And the plan is, when the Parliament resumes, Whitlam, still with the numbers, will move a vote of no confidence in Malcolm Fraser, now Prime Minister, but not having the majority on the floor of the House. So that is Whitlam's plan. Well and good. The only trouble with this plan was it wasn't going to work. Reg Withers, the leader of the Liberal Party in the Senate, secured supply. And once that was achieved, Whitlam was gone. He was finished. There was no going back. It was a fait accompli. When the Parliament convened at 2 o'clock on the 11th of November 1975, Gough was no longer Prime Minister. But there'd been no official announcement. So when the Parliament resumed, it appeared to be business as usual. What a farce. It of course wasn't business as usual, but the Whitlam government is sitting here in the government benches. The Fraser opposition is sitting on the other side, but Malcolm Fraser is already the caretaker Prime Minister, sworn in by the Governor-General a few minutes earlier. The journalists are sitting in the gallery, looking down on the politicians, reading the statement from the Governor-General, explaining why he's dismissed the Prime Minister. And journalists had their hands shaking as they're reading the statement. The sense of drama and tension was extraordinary. Gough was putting on a magnificent facade. He'd been destroyed. His Prime Ministership had just been destroyed by the Governor-General. Yet he came into the chamber, fired up, but in control. He was in control and he was thinking about what to do. And of course, he had a strategy. It was a flawed strategy, but he did come with a strategy. And after Fraser announced that he was the Prime Minister, sworn in by the Governor-General, Whitlam moved a vote of no confidence in the new government. And he carried the numbers because he had the numbers on the floor of this chamber. The crowd is downstairs, the crowd is angry, it's emotional, and Whitlam comes out onto the front stairs. He's next to the official secretary, David Smith, who's just read the proclamation dissolving the Parliament. Gough stands to his full height, his shoulders back, and he delivers the most famous speech in Australian political history.
Well may we say, God save the Queen. because nothing will save the Governor-General.
He'd been deposed, but he wasn't going to accept the judgment of the Governor-General. He was now going to appeal to the Australian people, and this is when his campaign started. Malcolm Fraser, as the caretaker Prime Minister, has got to get into his car and go back to Government House to formally advise Sir John Kerr to call an election, to call a double dissolution election. So Fraser navigates his way along this pathway here, along the road. There are people, angry, upset, emotional people, calling out, abusing Fraser. The sense of anger is palpable. Fraser's calm, he's resolute, he knows he's won. He's not betraying any sense of victory, but there is a smile, there is a slight smile on his face. That's the giveaway. I mean, we'd never imagined this would happen. I mean, I knew the reserve powers existed, but I couldn't believe they would actually be used. I knew the result of that election, that Whitlam had no chance and that Fraser would be victorious when it came to the actual election itself.
Did you have a feeling that this might be the fraying of our democracy, that this might damage our democracy?
Oh, I had very strong feelings about what happened. From the moment it happened, I was a very powerful critic of Sir John Kerr. I believe that he had abused the powers of the Governor-General, abused the Crown's powers. He did not consult properly with Whitlam. That is what he should have done. And what we're aware of now is every subsequent Governor-General has indicated, either in public or in private, they would not have done what Kerr did.
Looking back, did it damage our democracy?
I think it did some damage to our democracy, but I guess the real lesson from it is our democracy is very resilient. And I say, well, it's not going to happen again, because what happened on the 11th of November was you had three extraordinary figures, three incredible personalities, Kerr, Whitlam and Fraser. Now, you're never going to have those three personalities coming again in those three roles. They were too concerned about their own self-interest and not sufficiently concerned about the national interest and the quality of our parliamentary democracy. Keating has subsequently said that if he'd been Prime Minister at the time and Kerr had attempted to dismiss him, he would have had Kerr arrested.
Imagine. Imagine the scene. I mean, it was a coup, wasn't it?
No, it wasn't a coup. It wasn't a coup. Kerr exercised a legitimate power. The problem was that the power he exercised should not have been exercised the way it was at the time it was. He abused the exercise of the power.
You've told me that you felt that the dismissal of the Whitlam government was an outrage. But I looked back at your coverage from the day. On Wednesday, November 12, your report on page 1 of The Australian is very straight.
I took 5 minutes out, about 7 p.m, before I started to write, thinking to myself, stay calm, be professional, don't write some emotional piece of trash. Write something for the ages.
Why did you write it so straight?
One of the things about being a political journalist is that you think through how you're going to operate. What are the principles you're going to follow as a journalist? And I guess I decided very early on that I was going to be, as much as I could, in terms of news coverage, a professional, impartial journalist. Did I have firm views? Did I have firm views about what was going on in politics? You bet I did. And so then in my columns, in my contributions to the op-ed page, in my commentary, I expressed what those views were, I think, in a pretty strong and powerful way.
The Australian was taking a strong editorial line about the constitutional crisis. The Australian was, in fact, in its editorials, encouraging Sir John Kerr to end this situation and essentially dismiss the Whitlam government. including on the morning of the actual dismissal. You were young, you were 28, but you were very senior at the paper. You were the most senior person in the Federal Parliamentary Press Gallery Bureau. Did you have moments of concern about the juxtaposition between your desire to do straight reporting, your personal view that the dismissal would be wrong, and the Australians' very strong position on it?
The Australian did have a strong position in late 1975, and that position was that the Whitlam government was a danger to the country, that the economic policy it was following was too great a problem for the country, and the Australian supported Malcolm Fraser when he blocked the budget, and then the Australian supported Sir John Kerr when he sacked the Whitlam government. I'd been very critical of the Whitlam government in my coverage, but I was very critical of the way the Whitlam government was liquidated. What happened at the end was, and I understood this, the editor of the paper said to me that my views on Kerr's dismissal of Whitlam and my views on Fraser's blocking of the budget were such that it wasn't tenable for me to remain as political correspondent of the paper. The differences between myself and the paper were too great. I understood that. I mean, I later, many years later, became editor-in-chief of The Australian. And so I've had the experience of sitting in the editor's chair and sitting in the political correspondent's chair. So I understood all that. What happened was that I moved on. I didn't remain as political correspondent of the paper, and the following year I left the paper.
There must have been a small sense of justice when you came back and ultimately became editor-in-chief.
It was a long time later, Ken Cowley, the chief executive, and Rupert Murdoch, over dinner one night in Sydney, offered me the position of editor-in-chief of the paper, which was an enormous privilege.
Looking back at your 28-year-old self, what would you say to him now about his feelings about all of that?
You've got me with that. You've got me. Stop, because it was just, that's the only question today I can't answer, because it's about what I think of me.
Yeah. Did you have a sense that you'd been wronged at the time, and then when you became editor-in-chief and thinking about some of the 28-year-olds who were working for you, did you have a different opinion of your conduct back then?
I didn't think I'd been wronged. I regarded the fact that I'd been political correspondent of the paper and had the chance to cover this extraordinary government and get to know Whitlam and all these ministers and write about them and assess them and support them and criticise them. I regarded this as a phenomenal privilege. I always had this sense of the responsibility vested in my job, what a privilege it was, and how I had to do everything I could in the most professional sense possible to discharge the responsibilities of the job. So no, when the editor indicated to me, look mate, we can't wear you anymore, I accepted that. I didn't feel that I'd been wronged at all.
You were 28, you were very senior, but you were inexperienced, I suppose, as a journalist compared to your level of experience now. Do you look back at yourself as a kind of brash young thing who was maybe a bit too bold with his opinions, or not?
Look, to be perfectly frank, in those days, you had to be a little bit aggressive, a little bit brash, and a little bit bold. If you were working in a political correspondence job in the press gallery, and if you didn't have some of those qualities, you were crushed. You wouldn't survive 24 hours, let me tell you. The pressure every day was simply enormous. This was a question of survival. It was that elemental.
You got to have a life in journalism, up close to the most exciting things happening in Australia. What's journalism given you?
Journalism has given me so much. I mean, I've had the most fortunate and lucky career because journalism for me has been a project of discovery excitement, perpetual learning. The point about being a journalist is that every day is unique, every day is different, every day you learn something new, every day you have a new experience. It's an absolute privilege to be a journalist and a special privilege to be a political journalist.